All right. So what I want to talk to you guys today is cortisol. So you hear a lot about cortisol and how, too much of it is bad for you. It's a very detrimental thing. And it's definitely not good to have a ton of it. And we're going to kind of dive into that today. And we're going to look into what cortisol actually is and then why having too much of it for prolonged periods is not beneficial really to your health in general, and then just your progress in the gym as well too. Now, if we just take a step back and let's actually figure out what cortisol is. So cortisol is a steroid hormone that is produced by the adrenal glands that are sitting on top of each kidney, and it's going to play a pretty vital role in a ton of physiological processes, including regulating the metabolism, combating inflammation, and its biggest thing in my eyes is it is a stress response through the HPA axis. And if we're going to get technical, the HPA axis is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and you'll kind of see how why that's laid out the way that it is, like in that order here in just a second. Now, this might get a little technical, but this just kind of gives you a little bit of a background of that term, the HPA axis. So any kind of stress is going to trigger the hypothalamus, which is located, in your brain, right, to release a corticotropin releasing hormone, or they call it CRH for short. Um, Once that hormone is released, it stimulates the pituitary gland to then release adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which then signals the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. So if we go back to the HPA axis, it's kind of in that order, right? How, the hypothalamic, the pituitary, and then the adrenal. So in a very simplified manner, stress triggers the body to produce cortisol. So all that's good and fine and good. We understand that part, but where does it actually come from? Now, the production and the release of cortisol follows a pretty detailed multi-step process, but I'm going to break it down into three main steps: the initiation step, and then a stimulation step, and then a production step. Now, again, this might be a little overstepping um, I don't want to get too in depth in these calls here because I don't want to go over some people's heads. I like to keep it as simplified as possible, but because this it can honestly confuse the heck out of me too. But when the body perceives stress, this is talking about the initiation phase. The hypothalamus, which again is a region in your brain, releases a hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. So you have stress, the body perceives stress. It releases a hormone called CRH. CRH then stimulates the pituitary gland, which is again another part of the brain, to release another hormone called the adrenocorticotropic hormone, the ACTH. From that ACTH then travels through the bloodstream to the adrenal glands, which are located on top of the kidneys, and then these glands receive the signal from that ACTH to produce and release cortisol. So again, in a very simplified manner, once the body perceives stress, it goes down this chain of events to produce cortisol to combat that stressful event. And there's so much stuff about this that we could, go down into the rabbit hole about, but we're going to really focus on stress and how that affects, fat accumulation, fat loss, and things like that. So, stress-induced cortisol affects energy balance, and we all know, the whole calories in, calories out. That's all based on the energy balance model, right? You have to burn more than you take in to lose fat, right? That's the whole calories in, calories out. That's the whole basis of that, right? Um, so again, stress-induced cortisol affects that energy balance, which is going to lead to fat storage. And this is despite zero caloric intake. And that's pretty important keep in the back of your mind as we go through this. Now, chronic stress paired with sedentary behavior, this will or can result in cortisol driven insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, and increased levels of triglycerides as well too. So if we go even deeper, into that, we'll talk about high cortisol, low cortisol, things like that. But I think it's important before we do that to define what is what am I talking about when I say stress, right? So I think people view the term stress in different manners, right? Um, so like if you I don't know. You walk outside and this morning in your car didn't start because it's 20 degrees outside, right? That'll probably put you in a stressful state for a little bit until you get things settled out and you get to work, wherever that you got to go. But if we're talking about stress for cortisol reasons, like stress can be in the physical state, like chronic pain and things like that. But when we're talking about cortisol, we're mainly talking about I guess the best way to put this is like emotional distress, stress, I guess. So like, arguing with your spouse, you're late to work, the kids are screaming, you have a very high demanding job, chronic stress, right? All this can raise your cortisol levels, and for me personally, in past relationships that I had been in, when I would try to compete in these bodybuilding shows. I was so stressed out from that crappy relationship that it showed in my physique 100%. In the very first show that I did, when I was dating Elise, my wife at the time, my stress was none. I mean, it was zilch, nada, and my prep was so easy. I was like, oh my God, I wish I wouldn't have had these other individuals in my life, at that time, because it was causing a lot more stress, internally and externally than I really needed. So, um, and now when we're looking at actually cortisol and fat loss, we're going to look at a high cortisol environment and a low cortisol environment. So, high cortisol is obviously a very stressful environment. Now, I want to talk about two main things here. So we're going to talk about lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fats, and then lipogenesis, which is fat storage. And the easiest way to remember this, at least for me, is I'm sure that you guys know what a Sega Genesis is, right? It's an old gaming system. I have an old Sega Genesis in storage in the closet in there. So for me, lipogenesis, it's fat storage, and then lipolysis is just the other one. It's the breakdown of fats, and that's kind of one way that I remember it. And then another way that you could kind of keep up with this knowledge is if you think about liposuction, right? They're sucking the fat out of you, during this surgery. So anyway, that's just an easy way to kind of keep those two, lipolysis and lipogenesis, separate, that kind of thing. So while cortisol can stimulate lipolysis, which again is the breakdown of fats in some tissues, it's going to promote lipogenesis, which is fat storage, in others. And the big kicker here is especially in the visceral adipose tissue in the abdominal region. And all of you here probably know that visceral fat is way worse than just regular fat on your left hand, underneath your arms, like whatever. That visceral fat, which is the fat on your organs, that's pretty bad. And so these high cortisol environments, it's going to promote that lipogenesis specifically in that visceral adipose tissue. And then if we just look, from a very basic standpoint, as far as like insulin sensitivity goes, high cortisol levels are going to impair insulin signaling pathways, which will lead to a reduced glucose uptake by your muscles and then an increase in glucose production by the liver. And this will lead to a state of insulin resistance, where the body just needs more insulin to achieve this same glucose lowering effect as it had before, but your body won't be able to keep up. So again, it's going to favor fat storage. And then if we look at a low cortisol environment, we're going to have a reduced lipogenesis. With lower cortisol levels, a very a less stressful environment, the drive for lipogenesis in that visceral adipose tissue is going to be reduced. Potentially favoring fat loss. Um, and then, just from a very basic, 30,000 foot view, high cortisol levels can cause muscle breakdown, mood disorders, immune suppression, and just fat accumulation, obviously. And then low cortisol, you can have too much, or you can have too much and you can have too little, right? Look, you got to have some, but too low also has, some issues as well too. Not as much as high, but I would say, but like low cortisol leads to fatigue, hypoglycemia, and pretty, what's the word? Maybe heightened inflammatory responses. So like the body's like really easy to be set off and like inflamed, I guess is the best way to put that. Um, and then as far as like how can you identify cortisol levels, there's really like four main ways to do that. A blood test, a salivary test. They have a urinary cortisol test. It's like a 24-hour test. And then you have an ACTH stimulation test, which evaluates the adrenal response from the release of that hormone that we talked about earlier. So, and obviously the most common one is going to be, blood cortisol. And this is kind of a separate topic, but this is why that I favor people if they can to work out early in the day. Because if you think about it, early in the morning, your cortisol spikes, and it spikes, it starts to trend down all the way throughout the day until you go to sleep, and then 2 3 a.m. it spikes again. In that gradual decrease in cortisol, it's this natural process, right? And that's what helps you actually wake up in the morning is that cortisol level spiking and coming back down some. But what's something that all of us here do on a daily basis that is stressful to the body? Anybody know? You should know. All of you do this, including myself.
Workout.
Go to the gym. Yep. So if you're if your cortisol is spiked early in the morning, it's trending down, and then you're like, okay, I want to go work out at 6 o'clock at night, right? Boom, it's going to spike it up again, and then so it's in this constant state of just elevated cortisol. Now, if that's just your schedule, that's just your schedule. That's nothing that you can do about it. But if you can control that and work out earlier in the day to where it's going to favor that natural, titration down, it's a heck of a lot better for you. And if you think about it as well too, maybe from a psychological aspect, for me personally, training is the hardest thing that I have to do every single day. There's nothing else during my day that is harder than when I go train legs or go train chest. That's the hardest thing that I have to do unless I had an outside labor job where I'm out digging a ditch or something. That's obviously going to outweigh that, but I would rather have that very stressful environment as early on in the day as I can. So again, it can start to, titrate down, so whenever, bedtime comes, that cortisol is low, very low stressful environment. I'm able to get into a deep sleep. And then again, that 2 or 3 a.m. period, it spikes up. Um, and then if we look, how cortisol has the effect on muscle and fat. Muscle, if we're looking at muscle, high cortisol breaks down muscle proteins. It reduces muscle protein synthesis. Um, and even low cortisol is going to support muscle preservation and its androgen effect. So again, just being in a low stressful environment is going to favor muscle gains. Brother, if you have a very stressful job and you're running a wide open 24/7, just stressed out all the time. And then again, kind of like what we talked about earlier, that cortisol is going to promote that visceral fat storage and insulin resistance. While low cortisol, not bottomed out low, but lower cortisol is going to reduce that fat storage, and it will actually enhance um, fat burning effects as well too. And now there's a couple things that you can do to actually make your cortisol level healthy. Mediation, sleep, a balanced diet, regular exercise. Supplements like ashwagandha is a good one. If I had to to say what's the best supplement for cortisol control, it's ashwagandha for sure. And I think the doses I would I don't want to be incorrect, but I think it's maybe 1,200 milligrams daily, somewhere in there. I would have to look and see. But if you're having high cortisol environments, high stress environments, taking a little bit of ashwagandha daily will definitely help just lower that cortisol, in itself. Um, limit stimulants, like caffeine and nicotine, the best that you can. Taking a probiotic, which is going to promote gut health, which all of this is tied into that HPA axis. The HPA axis is also tied into the gut brain axis. And again, this is like you could talk about this stuff all day long, but all the stuff is so interconnected together. Having a healthy gut is also going to help, lower cortisol as well too. Because if you think about it, if you have an unhealthy gut, your body's going to be chronically inflamed all the time. Inflammation is stress. Chronic stress equals what? High cortisol. Um, and then, just overall try to have positive social interactions. I know that's probably hard to do in today's day and age, but just try to be a chill person. Don't let things really bother you. Um, just kind of got to control what you can control and just let the rest roll off, right? I mean, that's the best way to put it. That's honestly how that I handle things. If I know that I can't control this, and then if me getting worked up over something is going to make the matter worse, I'm not even going to put that. I'm not even going to entertain that thought, right? I just let it roll off. And if it's still bugging me by the end of the day or something, I might address it. But again, I'm just trying to control what I can control. Um, and then outside of that, that's really about it. The biggest thing though is just making sure that we just try to again control our environment, and just don't overly stress about things. And again, I know in 2025, stress is probably is at an all time high for everybody, probably. But the calmer that you can be, the more of a low stress environment that you can be, and just uh, the kindness, I guess, that you show your own self, and how you show up for yourself, can go a long way too. So. Um, But yeah, anybody got any questions about cortisol or anything at all? Anything about any supplements, anything like that? Or questions about anything in general, I guess.
I got one. So as far as I know some guys, and I've actually been looking into it as well, just because my sleep's not exactly what I want it to be. How does napping affect your cortisol levels? Like if you take a nap midday or something like that.
So I think now, and I might be wrong on this. I'll have to look this up. But I think it depends on the duration of the nap. So if you look at studies when people talking about like power naps. So like for me, if it's 1 or 2 o'clock and I'm like completely gassed and I need a nap, right, to function, I'll go take a 20 minute power nap and I'll be good to go for several hours after that. But if I fall into a deep sleep and sleep for 2 or 3 hours and I wake up groggy, is that putting me in a more fatigued state? Probably. So I would assume that if I guess it depends on what the nap is. I guess if that makes sense, I would assume that like power naps that don't put you in that deep of a REM sleep, um, would be more beneficial than getting into a nap, getting into the into that REM sleep, and then 2 hours into it, you're abruptly woken up from REM sleep to an alarm going off 2 hours later. Again, I could be completely wrong on that, but that's just my guess. But a good way to gauge that is if you're taking a nap and you wake up completely fatigued, you're groggy. It takes you 30 minutes to get up. You slept for too long. Is what it boils down to. If you have to take a nap during the day, I set myself a timer for 35 minutes because I know it's going to take me about 5 minutes to actually fall asleep. Um, so I might take a 30-minute power nap, but when I wake up after that 30 minutes, like I'm good to go. Like I'm jumping out of bed. I'm good. I'm ready to do whatever I have to do. So that I would assume that that would probably be better for you. I would assume.
I'm curious to know. So, like, I know that you have, I guess most all of us on it, but the magnesium supplement and like the gut health shot,
Yep.
I assume that kind of plays a part in the cortisol.
Yep. So if you look at what magnesium actually does, what the mechanism of what the actual mechanism of magnesium is, is it's going to play a role in regulating neurotransmitters, and it will inhibit that HPA axis, which is going to reduce that cortisol production. So if it can, prohibit that, three-tiered step that I was telling you about earlier, it's going to just coherently reduce the amount of cortisol that's able to be produced. And it also does, a vast number of things. It also, supports GABA function, which is another neurotransmitter that promotes, relaxation, right? And I think that's probably why they term that calm magnesium calm, just for that, reason it's itself. But um, that's probably the two main drivers of, or the two main mechanisms of magnesium that I want to see happen. That's why I really try to get everybody to take that stuff because again, it inhibits that HPA axis, which is going to limit the amount of cortisol just even being produced, and then it promotes relaxation through those GABA neurotransmitters too. So, but good question. So I'm glad you didn't stump me on that one. So and then Brian said. Um, Perfect topic for today as I'm trying to manifest my inner Buddha while trying to wrangle these two children and work at the same time. Well, I'm sure Jacob isn't too far from you. You could just drop him off at Jacob's house and let him entertain them
Go ahead.
for the rest of his lunch break. So, um, but anyway, yeah. Anybody else got anything? If not, we will wrap it up and go from there. So, yeah, Ren said that sounds like a great idea. So there you go. Oh
I do have
man.
one question
Yep.
because I've just seen your shirt. What is on your shirt?
It's a
What is
it's
that?
a, it's a Goodwill shirt. Hang on.
I just saw it and I was like,
I think it says uh, weekend got
I
me
just,
feeling like it's a good Goodwill shirt. It's just wear around the house
yeah.
groceries, type shirt. So, but anyway, well, cool deal. Yep, I appreciate you guys being here today.
Hey,
As
Austin, I got
always.
one more question if you got
Yeah,
time.
yeah, absolutely.
So say like you are having just an overly stressed day, like you are arguing with your girl or you got a bunch of crap going on, would it just be smarter if you have a training day scheduled for that day and you have all that stuff going on? Would it be ideal to just take that day, go work out the next day and kind of reschedule your stuff, or just kind of power through and push through that shit?
I wouldn't say that you should probably skip it. I wouldn't say that. Like if you had some kind of like traumatic thing to where she throws all your clothes out in the yard, you got to find somewhere else to sleep, right? Like, you probably should focus on that, before the gym. But I don't think that's gonna, throw you out of whack too much. Now, if it's a constant style thing to where like it's chronic stressors and you wake up the next morning and you're like, man, I feel so fatigued, I do not feel like it today, then it's probably good to take that rest day for sure. But you know for me personally, back in the day when I had those crappy relationships, just getting out of the house and going to the gym saved my sanity and saved me from saying a lot of things I probably shouldn't have said. So if anything, it probably, lowered my cortisol, and, in an essence. So, it can, I see the gym as like as me time, I guess. So, it just kind of helps relax me, in a way, I guess. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yep, and same, Rand. Yep, working out always makes me, feel better. Absolutely. Yeah, if I don't, like, today's my rest day, and I'm bored. I want to go work out, but I know that I can't. So, just is what it is. So, but anyway, yeah, we're right on time. So, yep. If you guys got any more questions, just let me know. As always, through Telegram, whatever, and we'll just go from there. So, I will catch you guys later and talk to you guys soon. See y'all.
So yeah.